All right, so let's talk about organisms and when it comes to the number of cells. So, although living things are made of cells, organisms can be unicellular, which means they're composed of just one cell. And here you have some examples. You have amoebas, yeast, and bacteria. Right, all examples of unicellular organisms, or just organisms made up of one cell. And then here you have multicellular. And these are organisms that are composed of many cells that may organize into tissues, etc. And so here you have this oxalato. I'm using an animal here, but remember, multicellular organisms can also be plants. And so this is what we're going to focus on is the difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. I remember we talked about this right here. Prokaryote means before there was a nucleus. And so these guys right here, there's something called a nucleoid here, but it isn't the same as this, as a nucleus, right? So here, this DNA just kind of hangs out there, very spaghetti thread-like, without a nucleus to protect it, right? So again, prokaryote before the nucleus versus a eukaryote. And this eukaryote, it actually has a nucleus right here protecting the DNA. So the DNA is in here just actually protected by this nucleus because y'all remember DNA is very important, right? It has a genetic code. It's the instructions to make the living organism in which the DNA is in. So it's very important that it's protected by the nucleus. And in eukaryotes, remember, true nucleus. That means it has a nucleus, which again is right here. Right, and we're going to dive into all of these. I'm not going to go into too much detail right now because we will see what all of these things do in the coming slides. But just remember, take this. This is a takeaway that you should get from this image: is that the eukaryote has a nucleus, but it also has a lot more going on. Right? You see all of these different organelles. This prokaryote right here is lacking all of these. You'll see some ribosomes kind of hanging out in there. We'll talk about those. But for now, just notice how much more simple this prokaryote is compared to this eukaryote, which looks pretty busy with a lot of different things going on in here. Right. And I'll just point this out right here that this is a plant cell. And you can tell because of this thing called the chloroplast and because it's green. Right. So we'll look at that in more detail too. So prokaryotes are the first cells, right? Again, they came before there was a nucleus, which means they came before, right? Which means they came first. And so here you see an example of a prokaryote, right? Very simple organism. And these cells that lack the nuclei or membrane-bound organelles. And again, right here, right? There is no nucleus and there are no organelles. And it includes bacteria. Bacteria is very simple, y'all. It's single-celled organism, and again, for us, it's very important. It helps keep us healthy. We have it in our intestines. We have it all throughout our body, and for the most part, it is not harmful to us or even beneficial to us. But if you get an imbalance or you get the wrong kind of bacteria in your body, it can be harmful. Right. So again, it is the simplest type of cell. It is a prokaryote. It's single, it is circular in its chromosome. And so a lot of times when scientists do genetic testing or genetically modified organisms, a lot of times they'll take the DNA and the circular DNA and they will insert DNA from another organism and they'll insert it back into cells. And this is kind of how they do genetic modification, right? Or they change the genes to make plants or organisms do different types of things. Right? I remember I had a professor once who used different type of genes to make grapefruit more resistant to pests and to hot weather. And so here you have a prokaryote, right? Remember, pro before and karyote nucleus. So again, you don't see the nucleus here, right? You see its DNA just kind of hanging out here, but there is no nucleus protecting it. And so it does have a nucleoid region, which you see right here. It's the center that contains the DNA, but again, there is no nucleus protecting it. It's surrounded by a cell wall and a cell membrane. And so this is something to remember, y'all. This right here, let's see, where is it? The cell, well, I guess the cytoplasmic membrane right here, right? The word membrane kind of means skin, right? So here, remember that every type of cell has a cell membrane, but only some cells will have this cell wall, mostly just prokaryotic cells, some type of prokaryotic cells, and plant cells. Right, so peptidoglycan, I don't know if you can pick this out from what we learned about biomolecules, but you have the word peptid there and you have the word glycan. And so just remember when peptides, when you think of peptides, think of proteins, right? When you think of the three letters GLY or even the C thrown in there, GLYC, that's kind of sounds like glucose and it means a sugar. right? So this what surrounds this right here is actually made of proteins and sugar. And then it contains ribosomes. No membrane in their cytoplasm. The ribosomes will just kind of float around there freely. Right here, you see all these little dots kind of look like little peas floating in that cytoplasm, but these little things right here are ribosomes. And they use ribosomes. Whenever you think of those, think of proteins, because wherever ribosomes are, proteins are being made. Think of a ribosome as like a protein factory, right? That is where proteins are made. And all of this is happening in the cytoplasm. This is just that jelly-like fluid, semi-fluid right here that pretty much cushions all of these different, the DNA and the ribosomes. That's kind of where they live, but it's also like a way for them to travel. And if there's chemical reactions that happen, they happen there in the cytoplasm. Right, so here we have a eukaryote. Remember, the last thing we saw was a prokaryote, very simple compared to this guy right here. This eukaryote has a lot of different things going on inside of it, right? These are all of the different organelles, and we're going to talk about organelles in detail. Whenever I use that word, think of like our organs, right? We have a brain, we have a heart, we have lungs. All of those things do something for our body. That's kind of what these organelles do too. An organelle is just like a mini organ, right? It does something, but it does it for our cells. And so right here, you can see different things, the mitochondria, centrioles, Golgi apparatus, and we'll talk about all these in detail. I won't go into it too much now, but just want to show you and point out that these are more complex than a prokaryote, right? So again, eukaryote means true nucleus, and here you see that nucleus, right? Cells that have this nucleus membrane bound organelle, that is how you define them. That's how you define a eukaryote, is it has this nucleus. And this includes protists. And protists, y'all, when you think of protists, they are basically unicellular organisms that live in like in pond water and rivers, things like that. You usually find protists there. Fungi are just things like mushrooms and mold. Plants, hopefully you know what plants are, right? Flowers, trees, that kind of thing. And then animals, anything from sponges to insects to humans, right? All of these different organisms have these eukaryotic cells. That is what makes them eukaryotes. So more complex type of cells. And again, you can see that compared to that prokaryote, that there's a lot more going on with these guys and with the prokaryotic cells. And so here again, eukaryote, true nucleus. Right? I really like this picture. It's really colorful and well designed. And so yeah, this is where the DNA lives in this nucleus. And so it contains three basic structures in the cell. And I keep pointing this out, but again, the nucleus is going to be that main centerpiece of this eukaryotic cell. And again, that's where the word comes from, right? Eukaryote, true nucleus. All right, so I mentioned earlier that all cells have a cell membrane. You can kind of think of the membrane. Whenever you think of membrane, it's kind of like a thin skin, right? So a membrane is a cell membrane. It's kind of like the skin of the cell, right? It's what surrounds us right here. And it basically does what our cell does, or what our skin does. It protects the inside of our bodies from the outside, right? And that's what this cell membrane, and it has a few different names. Yeah, we'll see those: a cell membrane, plasma membrane, phospholipid bilayer, the fluid mosaic model, all of these different names to refer to this right here, the cell membrane. And so, again, a main characteristic of, actually, it's for every cell, eukaryotic, prokaryotic, plant, animal, all these cells have a cell membrane. And then the cytoplasm with the organelles, the cytoplasm again is just this semi-fluid in here, kind of this jelly-like stuff inside of the cells where everything lives, right? It's cushioned by it. All the organelles travel through there. Chemical reactions happen there. And so the cytoplasm again is just this fluid-like stuff inside the cell. And then the organelles are all of these little organs that do things for our cells, right? You have the centrioles. Here again, you have the mitochondria. You have the rough ER, the smoothie R over here, the Golgi apparatus. And so we'll go into these in detail. And but yeah, this is the nucleus right here. And actually, let me kind of get all this stuff out of the way. So again, we have the nucleus here, we have the cell membrane all around here, and then the cytoplasm is in here, and the organelles are all inside of that. So two types of eukaryotic cells, right? We went over the prokaryotes, very simple, no nucleus. And then we went over basically the main characteristics of a eukaryotic cell. But now let's break down the eukaryotic cells into two different types, a plant cell and an animal cell. And so the one here on the left, it's easy to tell because of the color, right? Plant cells, plants are usually green. And so here you can tell this is a plant cell because of the green color, right? And then over here you have the animal cell. Remember, those are more round. But what I want to point out here is that a plant cell has a few different things going on that an animal cell does not, right? So the first thing I want to point out right here is the cell wall. So the cell wall is this structure right here, and let me put it out right here. All right, this is a cell wall. So plant cells have these cell walls, animal cells do not. That's what's really cool about these plant cells is that if you were to overwater these plants, the plant cell would not burst, right? You could give it as much water as you wanted, and this plant cell will not burst. You can overwater a plant and drown out the roots, but you cannot burst this plant cell because of the cell wall. Not the same with an animal cell, and people have actually passed away because of their cells bursting because they got too much water, right? And so over here, another thing that these plant cells have that we do not is this organelle right here called the chloroplast. And we'll go into more detail in these. I'm just pointing out the main differences right here, the main things that these plants have that we do not. So here you have this chloroplast. And let me just highlight this in this blue color. So here you have a chloroplast right there, a chloroplast right there, a chloroplast right here. Whoops. And so they have chloroplast, plant cells have, we do not, right? You do not see any chloroplast here. If you did have chloroplast, you would be green. But yeah, so the next one right here, let's see. And it's really noticeable, especially if you look at these through a microscope. One thing you can see right here is this thing called the central, right here. And actually, I'll just put this right on the central vacuole right there. And so this big bubble looking thing right here, this is the central vacuole. The central vacuole holds all different types of solutes or solids within this liquid right here. But the cool thing about this is that if there is a full central vacuole here, it will actually put pressure out on these cell walls. And so this will cause the plant to stand upright and look perky, right? If this central vacuole if the plant does not have water, the central vacuole is not very filled. And so these cell walls right here will kind of cave in a little bit. And that's why plants, when they are thirsty, they will start to look wilted or shriveled because there is no water in the central vacuole. And so it kind of shrivels down inside of itself. And yeah, so that is why a plant sometimes will look all wilted or shriveled because the central vacuole is empty. All right. And so again, these are some of the things right here that a plant cell has that an animal cell does not. And so let's look at these organelles in more detail. And remember, when we talk about organelles, we're just talking about microscopic bodies. An organ is, again, think of it like our heart or our lungs or our brain, but at a microscopic level and inside of our cells. It performs various functions for a cell. So the prokaryotic cell, remember back in the day, not a very efficient cell because it pretty much had to do everything. But when eukaryotic cells evolved, they had all these little organelles that now they're able to do just like very specific jobs. So the cell is able to function and specialize in different things, right? So then you have different types of cells for different types of tissues, and we'll talk about that in a second. Right, performs various functions for a cell, and they are found in the cytoplasm. And I pointed that out earlier. You kind of think of it like those jello molds where you put fruit inside of them sometimes, and then the fruits just kind of float inside the jello. That's kind of what's happening with these organelles, right? They're just kind of floating in the cytoplasm. And they may or may not be membrane bound. And remember, y'all, membranes are, again, like the little thin skin that surrounds things. And if you're talking about the cell membrane, it's like the little skin that surrounds our cells. And so here you see the animal cell organelles. Just in general, you can just notice that there are so many different types of organelles looking different, and they all serve different functions, and we'll see those individually in a second, right? But again, the nucleus is the main thing that stands out. Whenever you see these little peanut-shaped things right here, they kind of look like a bean or a peanut. These are the mitochondria, and we'll see that in more detail. And yeah, let's dive into these and be a little bit more specific with each one. Right. So when we're talking about the plant cells, you see again the main difference between that is that these are green and animal cells are not. But you also see the cell wall right here, right? That cell wall makes it very square shaped, very rigid. And let me kind of circle those right there. Again, some of the main differences. Where is the cell wall? Oh, here we go. The cell wall. All right, so that's one main difference. Something that the plant cell has that our animal cells do not. Another here is a chloroplast, and we'll see that in more detail. But the chloroplast right here, this is where photosynthesis happens, where plants convert sunlight energy into chemical energy. And then the other guy right here is the vacuole. So three things that the plant cell has that the animal cell does not.